friends, I'm Dr. Yogi Sarodi of Human Vikas Mahavidyalaya Beogram. I welcome you all in this session. Today we will learn about the story The Open Window, written by Hector Hugh Munro. Uh, this author is well known by his pen name Saki. So, before going to the details of the story, let us know a short introduction of the author, Hector Hugh Munro. The author Munro was born on 1870, particularly on 18th December 1870, and took his last breath on 14th November 1960. So, in his span of 46 years, he became a well known story writer and a literary artist. Known by his pen name Saki, he was a British writer born in Burma, now modern Myanmar, during Burma's colonial days under the British Empire. His writing is best known for its satirical portrayal of Edwardian England and the pretensions of the rich and the sophisticated. The Edwardian period includes the 9 years of the reign of King Edward VII from 1901 to 1910 and the period up to the end of First World War. He is a super storyteller of the lives and manners of people in this period. Saki is often compared to O. Henry and Dorothy Parker, known today for his short stories. He began his career with a book of history called The Rise of the Russian Empire, published in 1900. His first collection of short stories, called Not So Stories, came out in 1902. Beside his short stories, which were first published in newspapers and later anthologized into several volumes, he wrote a full-length play, The Watched Pot, in collaboration with a writer, and a short novel, The Unbearable Bassington. The Westminster Alice was a political parody modeled on Alice in Wonderland, and When William Came, a futuristic work about an imagined German invasion of Britain. So, in his stories, Saki joined as a trooper voluntarily to fight on in First World War, and wrote a number of stories from his trenches. And on 16 November 1916, while serving near the French town of Beaumont-Hamel, Hector Hugh Munro was fatally shot by Germans. So this is what is the tragedy happened with Munro. So friends, this is a short introduction of the author. Now, as far as characters theme is concerned, we find this has various themes. This story has various themes. First is the wildness, which we call as chaos, versus order of the society. Then we find empowerment. Third one is desire to escape. Then power of storytelling. Then comes the theme of rural calm. satirization of Edwardian society, this is also discernible in the story. And lastly, we find there is a hidden comedy also. So, this is what is the theme of the story. Now, as far as characters are concerned, we find there are mainly six characters in this story. First one is Frampton Nuttall's sister. It has a leading role. Then Mr. Frampton Nuttall, Ronnie, is a young character. Then one Mr. Sappleton, Mrs. Sappleton, his wife, and Vera, girl. So these are the six main characters. Frampton Nuttall's sister, she writes several letters of introduction to keep her brother Frampton from being lonely on his retreat to countryside. She writes one such letter in order to introduce him to Mrs. Sappleton. This is how Frampton finds himself in Mrs. Sappleton's home. Then Mr. Frampton Nuttall, he is a nervous man. Frampton Nuttall arrives in a new town seeking relaxation in order to alleviate an unspecified nervous disorder. Then Ronnie is a character, Mrs. Sappleton's youngest brother, okay, and a member of hunting party. He often teases her by singing a short song. Mrs. Sappleton's husband, Mr. Sappleton, is a member of hunting party. Mrs. Sappleton is Hampton's host and Vera's aunt. And Vera is a 15-year-old girl who greets Hampton when her parents are not at home and informs Mr. Sappleton, Mr. Nuttall, of her aunt's great tragedy. So, this is what is the introduction of the characters. Now, as far as story is concerned, we know plot is also very important because unless we know the plot, we cannot know how much or how the story will move. So, plot is such a logical sequence of events in which story moves further and reaches to particular climax. So, let us see plot of the story. See what happens here. Hampton Nuttall, seeking a nerve cure prescribed by his doctor, visits a rural area where he knows no one. His sister provides letters of introduction so he can meet people there. In a way, his sister gives introduction of few people in the form of letter. He pays a visit to Mrs. Sappleton first. While he waits for her in her house, her 15-year-old niece, Vera, is there. She keeps him company in the parlor. When she realizes Nuttall has never met her aunt and knows nothing about her, she explains that it has been 3 years since Mrs. Sappleton's great tragedy when her husband and brothers went hunting and never returned, presumably engulfed by a bog, which is similar to sinking in quicksand. Mrs. Sappleton keeps the large French window open every day, open for their return. Now, when Mrs. Sappleton appears, she is inattentive to Nuttall, talking instead about her husband's hunting trip and how she expects him home any minute. Her delusional manner and constant glances at the window make Nuttall uneasy. Then the hunters appear in the distance, and Nuttall, horrified, grabs his walking stick and exits abruptly. When the Sapletons exclaim over his sudden, rude departure, the niece calmly explains that he was probably frightened by the hunter's dog. She claims that Nuttall told her he was once chased into a cemetery in India and held at bay by a pack of aggressive dogs. So here in this story, we have a social conventions so that provide cover for mischief. The niece uses social decorum very much to her favor. First, she presents herself as inconsequential, telling Nuttall that her aunt will be down soon. But in the meantime, you must put up with me. It's a mean to sound like a self-effacing pleasantry, suggesting that she is not particularly interesting or entertaining, and it provides perfect cover for her mischief. Her next question to Nuttall sound like boring small talk. She asks whether he knows anyone in the area and whether he knows anything about her aunt. But as the reader eventually understands, these questions are a reconnaissance to see whether Nuttall will make a suitable target for a fabricated story. So, this is what is the plot of the story. Now, let us see a crux for summary of the story so that you will get better idea of the story. Friends, in this story, the open window, we find social conventions and proper etiquette provide cover for a mischievous teenager to create havoc on the nerves of an unsuspecting guest, Mr. Nuttall. Hampton Nuttall is a single man in a new town. His sister has arranged for him to meet several of her acquaintances to prevent him from becoming lonely there. On one such visit, Vera, the 15-year-old niece of Hampton's latest host, Mrs. Sapleton, invites him to sit and wait with her while her aunt readies. As he waits, Hampton anxiously thinks about an appropriate way to compliment the young girl while reserving the highest flattery for her aunt. However, before he can decide what to say, Vera breaks the silence and asks Hampton whether he knows many people in town. He admits to being a newcomer who knows hardly a soul and explains with a note of exhaustion that he is in the process of visiting all the contacts his sister made in the town 4 years ago when she worked at the factory. When Vera asks how well he knows her aunt, he confesses, admits that he doesn't know much about her besides her address and name. After answering, Frampton wonders to himself whether Mrs. Sapleton is married, and he notes sign of masculine habitation in the room. After determining that her aunt is a virtual stranger to Frampton, Vera decides to inform him of her aunt's great tragedy, which she states occurred 3 years ago. Shortly after Frampton's sister left the town, Frampton cannot imagine tragedy striking such a calm country town, but nevertheless listens intently to Vera's story. Vera, on the other hand, points to a large, open French style window in the room and remarks how odd it is to keep it open to such a warm afternoon. Curious, Frampton asks whether the window relates at all to the tragedy. It does. Vera explains how 3 years ago her aunt's husband and two young brothers, excited, went out, existed through that window to go snipe shooting. That summer was especially rainy, and all three of the men drowned in a big bog, BOG, while on their hunt. Tragically, nobody recovered the bodies. Since that day, her aunt has kept the window open during the evening, even uh, uh, window opening, ever hopeful that her husband and brothers will one day return. Hunting dog in town and walk back in through the window. So, Vera recounts the memories her aunt shared of the hunting trio. Mr. Sappleton's white raincoat slung over his arm, the sound of her younger brother, Ronnie, teasingly singing to her. Vera finishes the tragic tale by confessing that on occasion she gets a feeling that the man will actually appear at the window. Just as Vera finishes her story, Mrs. Sappleton enters. She immediately apologizes for the open window and explains that she's left it open for her husband and brothers who should soon return from shooting. She expects they, uh, they will be back uh, through the dirty her flowers with their muddy shoes, paying very little attention to her guest. Mrs. Appleton continues to talk about shooting, lamenting how few snipe there are this season and expressing hope that winter will bring a healthy supply of dusk. Hampton listens aghast at the grimness of the situation. He attempts to shift the conversation away from the hunting expedition, but Mrs. Sappleton cannot be redirected. Frequently, looking expectantly out the open window as she prattles on about hunting. In a final desperate attempt to shift the conversation, Hampton explained the trouble he has been having with his nose. Mrs. Sappleton cannot contain her yawn as Frampton details the differing medical opinions regarding the proper diet for a man in need of a nerve cure. Suddenly, Mrs. Sappleton jumps to attention and excitedly remarks that the hunting party has finally returned. Unbelievingly, Frampton looks to Vera, expecting to share with her a look of pity at the depth of Mrs. Sappleton's delusions. But Vera does not return his gaze. Instead, she looks out, horrified, onto the lawn. Frampton quickly turns towards the window and notices uh, three men, each armed, walking towards the house. One of them has a white coat draped over his Um, Following just behind is the small hunting spaniel. The men enter the house, and one of them sings out, "Bertie, why do you bound?" No, at this moment, Frampton grabs his belongings and bolts out of the house, narrowly escaping a collision with a passing cyclist on the street. One of the men, presumably Mr. Stapleton, asks Mrs. Stapleton about Frampton's quick exit. She explains that fleeing man is named Mr. Nuttall, and wonders why he looked as though he had seen a ghost. Just then, Vera interjects that it must have been the dog that frightened Frampton. She then tells a story, extravagant story, detailing Frampton's supposed deep phobia of dogs, stemming from an awful incident in which a pack of dogs chased him through a South Asian cemetery and forced him to hide away all night in a freshly dug grave. So, friends, uh, this is what is the central idea of the poem. To some extent, it is not entertaining. Sometimes feels bore actually what happens in the story, but this is what is the reality. But if you read it carefully, you will definitely get pleasure, suspense. Uh, so, uh, I hope you would have understood the story properly. In the next session, we will see analysis and discuss about the theme of the story also. So, friends, thank you. We'll stop here. Good day.